At the first thin breath of dawn, when the desert still held the cold of the night and the sky hovered between black and blood-colored blue, the Apache woman stood chained to a cottonwood post outside the half-ruined adobe ranch house, her wrists raw, yet her spine straight, her chin lifted, her dark eyes burning with a fire that no iron could choke. And when the cowboy approached, her boots slow in the dirt, spurs silent by choice, hat low, coat pulled tight against the morning chill, she did not look away, because she had learned long ago that fear was a luxury the conquered could not afford. And this man, Caleb Turner, knew in that moment that she was unlike any captive he had ever seen, not like the women who cried or pleaded or stared at the ground as if hoping the earth would swallow them whole, because this woman radiated something dangerous, something ancient, something that made the air feel tight in his lungs. He had found her 3 weeks earlier during a retaliatory raid ordered by men who called themselves law, but acted like wolves, after an Apache band had struck a cattle convoy near the river, striking with a broken spear, dragging wounded children to safety, standing her ground long after the others retreated, until she was clubbed from behind and bound in chains meant for animals. And ever since that day she had spoken little, her silence louder than screams, her refusal sharper than curses. And now, as dawn crept closer and the horizon bled light, Caleb knelt before her and unlocked the iron cuffs around her wrists, because something in him, some voice he could not silence, told him that keeping her chained was wrong. And when the metal fell away and clinked softly against the dirt, he expected her to flee or to strike, or at least to stagger in relief. But instead she laughed, low and bitter, the sound cutting through the stillness like a blade. And when he looked up at her, confused, she spoke for the first time in days, her voice rough yet steady, carrying the weight of mountains and graves, saying, "I'd rather die than be yours." And the words hit him harder than any bullet, because he had never claimed ownership, never touched her beyond binding her wounds, never spoken to her as a master to a slave. Yet she saw through him, through the uniform, through the pretense of mercy, straight to the truth of the world he represented, a world that took land, lives, names, wrists free but soul unbroken. He realized that freeing her hands had not freed her in the way he imagined, because the land between them was soaked in blood older than either of them. And when she stepped closer, her shadow stretching across his chest as the sun finally crested the hills, she told him of her name, Naya, daughter of the Red Mesa, sister to the fallen. And with each word she spoke the desert seemed to listen, the wind carrying her defiance across the plain. And Caleb felt the weight of every choice that had brought him here, from the war that taught him to follow orders without asking why, to the ranch that paid him to guard stolen cattle, to the chains he had agreed to lock around her knowing full well what they meant. And when she asked him why he had come at dawn, why he had freed her now, he told her the truth, that he could no longer sleep, that her silence haunted him more than gunfire, that every night he saw her standing in flames that did not consume her. And she smiled then, not kindly, not cruelly, but knowingly, and said that guilt was a seed, and that whether it grew into redemption or rot depended on what he did next. And before he could answer, voices echoed from the ranch house, men waking, men who would see her free and demand her blood. And in that moment, Caleb understood that cutting her chains was not an ending, but a beginning, a line crossed that could not be uncrossed. And as he pressed a knife into her palm and whispered for her to run, and if she ran she would run toward war, not away from it. And with that she turned toward the rising sun, toward the land that remembered her footsteps, toward a fate written in fire and resolve, leaving Caleb standing, alone with broken chains in the dirt and the knowledge that the story unfolding before him would not be one of savior and captive, but of two souls caught in the collision of history. And as the screen of your imagination fades on this chapter, remember that stories like this are born from courage and truth. Subscribe to this channel and stand with us at the edge of the next dawn, where chapter 2 awaits. The sun had barely cleared the jagged teeth of the hills when the shouting began behind Caleb, angry voices tearing through the quiet like rifle fire. And he did not turn around, because he already knew what he would see: men with sleep-heavy eyes and hate-light smiles, hands reaching for guns, minds already decided. And instead he watched Naya walk away from him, Not running, not stumbling, but moving with the calm certainty of someone who had already made peace with death and therefore could not be chased by fear, her bare feet touching the earth as if greeting an old friend. And in that moment, Caleb understood something that no sermon or command had ever taught him. Freedom was not granted by cutting chains. It was claimed by refusing to kneel, and the men behind him shouted for him to stop her, cursed him for a fool, accused him of betrayal. And when the first shot rang out, the crack echoing across the valley, Caleb moved without thinking, stepping into the line of fire, drawing his revolver not to hunt but to block, yelling for them to lower their weapons, his voice raw and shaking. And the men laughed because they had seen this before. Men who hesitated, men who thought mercy made them strong. And one of them spat in the dust and said she was worth more dead than alive, that bounties were paid in scalps, not regrets. And Naya stopped then, slowly turning back, her eyes finding Caleb's, and there was no gratitude in her gaze, no plea, only a question, silent and sharp. Who are you choosing to be? And the weight of it crushed him harder than any threat, because choosing her meant choosing against everything he had been paid to protect, and choosing them meant living the rest of his life haunted by the sound of her chains hitting the dirt. And when another gun lifted, Caleb fired not at a man, but into the air, the report rolling like thunder, and he said if they wanted her they would have to go through him. And for a heartbeat the world held its breath, dust hanging, wind still, history pausing to watch. And then chaos erupted as Naya moved like lightning, using the knife he had given her not in panic, but with precision, cutting reins, spooking horses, disappearing into the brush as bullets tore through empty air. And Caleb fought not as a hero but as a man buying time, taking blows, bleeding, falling, rising again because each second mattered, because somewhere ahead of him an Apache woman was reclaiming her fate. And when it was over and the men lay, cursing and wounded, and the ranch burned behind them, Caleb staggered away from a life that no longer fit him, following tracks only he could see, not because he believed he could save Naya, but because he believed he had to witness what came next. And days passed in heat and hunger and sleepless nights, until he found her standing at a ridge overlooking a hidden valley where survivors gathered, women with scars, children with hollow eyes, warriors sharpening blades worn smooth by loss. And when she faced him there was still no forgiveness in her expression, that their pain did not exist to redeem broken men. And if he walked with them he would walk under their rules, and if he failed he would die without ceremony. And as the valley prepared for the coming storm, because storms always came, Naya stood before her people and spoke not of hatred but of memory, reminding them who they were before chains, before maps, before names were stolen. And her voice carried strength that no rifle could silence. And when the inevitable battle arrived, Naya fought not to conquer but to endure. And Caleb fought beside her, knowing history would never write his name kindly. And when the smoke cleared and the valley still stood, scarred but breathing, it was about standing ennowned beneath the sky, leaving Caleb alive, changed and unclaimed. And as this chapter closes, remember that stories like this survive only when they are heard, shared and honored. So if you want more untold histories, more voices that refuse chains, and more stories that cut deep and stay with you, subscribe to the channel and walk with us into the next story, where truth waits just beyond the horizon.
Subscribe to my channel.